This is episode 73 of the Life in Norway show. Today I'm joined by Agnes Erickson, who swapped Fresno in California's San Joaquin Valley for Mandal, a small town in the very south of Norway. We talk about her life in Mandal and how she's able to work for Oslo-based company Norrøna despite living 4.5 hours away. We also chat about the benefits and challenges of living in a small town and the adaptation process of moving from the US to Norway, amongst many other things. You can find out more information on everything we talk about today on the show notes page. Just head on over to lifeinnorway.net/podcast and look for episode 73. Happy listening. I'd like to welcome Agnes Erickson to the latest episode of the Life in Norway show. She's originally from Fresno, California, but now calls Mandal in Southern Norway her home. Agnes, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. We met in person a few weeks ago, and when I heard your story, I was super keen to have you on the show. So let's find out why. What brought you to Norway in the first place?
Yeah, I just have to say it was really nice to meet you too. It was kind of a full circle moment. I moved to Norway almost 11 years ago. And when I first got here, I kind of had you as my guru. So just so you know, I followed your blog and you taught me a lot those first few years. So when I met you 10 years later down the line, it was a bit of a fangirl moment, just so you know.
That's very kind of you to say so.
Yeah. What brought me here to Norway? I can answer that in one word. It was love. Mm-hmm. And for the fuller story, it was being young and thinking it was so easy to just, cross the Atlantic and start a whole new life. And I was very optimistic. And I met my partner, Jonas, when we were studying abroad in Liverpool, England. That was in 2009. And that was when we were studying. And then I lived in San Francisco for 3 years, did a bit of long distance there, worked in hospitality, worked with the Kimpton Hotel Group, and then got tired of long distance. So we had a bit of back and forth between who was going to move where. But in the end, I always joke that you won't like this, but I always joke that Norwegian men are mama's boys, and it's just hard to take them away from home. So that's why I'm sitting here in Mandal today.
Excellent. Now, you work in the marketing team at Norrøna, it's a Norwegian sportswear brand that's actually starting to get some traction over in the US as well. But it's very, very synonymous with Norway and the Scandinavian mountains and the outdoor lifestyle here. So tell us a little bit about the company and how you got that job.
Sure. Yeah, it's one of those iconic Norwegian brands that is growing in the States. And it's exciting because when I told my family I got this job, they had no idea how big of a deal it actually was. But now, even 2 years in, they're starting to see the Viking logo and are getting excited, which is overdue, but nice to get that support from them. But I work currently as PR and text responsible in the marketing team. The company was founded by Jørgen Jørgensen in 1929, and it's nearly 100 years old and still owned and operated by the same family. So not only is it a very strong company with a lot of Norwegian traditions, but there's a lot of pride and family ownership, and it's exciting to be a part of. Absolutely.
And how did you get the job?
It showed up on my LinkedIn. And I joke that it was a bit of a trick because it was one of those easy apply jobs. So all I had to do was click and send in my resume. And then I heard back a few weeks later and they asked me to do a video interview, which I had never done before. And which is very daunting, by the way, because when you have the chance to erase your answers, you kind of get caught up on, I can do it better. I can do it better. So that was a fun experience. And then, I just got further in the process and ended up talking with the head of HR at the time and my now director, Martin. And it took about 2 months, actually. There was a lot of back and forth. And to be honest, it had a lot to do with the fact that I was living in Mandal and Norrøna is based out of Oslo, and they have a strong company culture where it's very important to be in the office and it's important to see your coworkers every day. And I support that. So they really went out on a limb and took a chance on me. And yeah, we just found a way to make it work. So I'm in the office 2 days a week, every week.
Let's hear a little more about that working arrangement.
Sure.
Then. I actually know a fair few people who have this long distance commute in Norway.
Yeah.
They live in one city and maybe work in another. Maybe it's in some cases they work there for a week and then go back to where they live for a week and so on. Or as in your case, you spend a few days in Oslo. But how does that work day to day? Are you traveling on the train during the day, working? Are you traveling in the evenings? Do you have a set schedule? How does that work?
Yeah, I also have to say it's pretty common here in smaller cities and all around Norway. I know a lot of people that have to travel 2 hours plus into Stavanger or into our neighboring city, Kristiansand, which is about close to an hour away. Oslo, yeah, it's a bit of a commute. It takes about 4.5 hours. And we have it set that I come in every Monday and Tuesday, and it works both ways. It works for everyone because it's nice to start the week with your colleagues, and it's nice to get in all those meetings and all that FaceTime so you can use the next 3 days working from home or working in my co-working space like I do, and just really producing what's been asked and what's been discussed the first 2 days of the week. So yeah, it definitely works out. But that's not to say that I don't have FOMO. We're a pretty tight group in that department, and it's I think everyone can identify with what it feels like to want to be in 2 places at once.
Sure. I'm actually pulling up Mandal on the map now because I thought I knew where it was, but I'm actually slightly mistaken. It's just to the west of Kristiansand. I thought it was the other side. Yeah. And from the look of the town, I've been to a few of these southern Norwegian towns, Grimstad and Flekkefjord, for example. Yeah. It's got that vibe. It's got that white wooden houses, cobbled streets, marina. It looks like a lot of the towns down on the south coast. Could you describe Mandal to us if for someone who's never been there?
Sure. I have to say that what you just described is really spot on. When you think of a classic southern town in Norway, I would picture Mandal, and not because I live here, but because it is the symbol of southern charm. It's slower. It's got more cobblestone streets. A lot of the buildings, a lot of my friends' homes are built before 1930. It's actually interesting. One of my friends just did a renovation on their house, and when they knocked down the walls, they found horsehair to be used as the insulation.
Wow. Okay.
So we're there. We're back there. Yeah, it's definitely a bit of old meets new, but leaning more on the side of old.
Yeah. Well, you really are at the very south of Norway, yes. Really. There are very few places any further south, if any at all.
Yeah.
What is that like in terms of the climate? Is it significantly different from other parts? I mean, we were talking just before we started recording that outside where I am now in Trondheim, it's -14, which is unseasonably cold for November, I have to say, but it is -14. I'm presuming it's not -14 down in the south, on the south coast.
That's correct, but it's still Norway. So it is -degrees today. I think today I woke up and it was -6 or 7. So we definitely still get that chill. But I think the biggest difference is that Mandal is right on the sea. We're right on the waterline. So that brings a lot of wind and a lot of unpredictable storms and rain. And as I'm saying this right now, I know that happens in a lot of places of Norway, but I think it's very true to the south that we might have a bit more variation throughout the day, and it doesn't stick. It snows. It snowed multiple times already this year in 2023. It's November, but it hasn't lasted until after lunch, So it's a grab bag. There's a lot of Gore-Tex, there's a lot of layering, but I have to say that that's very common in most parts of Norway.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps that's the biggest difference really in the winter. The snow here in Trondheim and certainly in Oslo, it tends to stick around for a while once it's fallen. Yeah. And how about the summer? My experience of Norway's southern coast in the summer is fantastic. I'm sure it's not sunny all season, but you do enjoy some good summers, right?
It is ideal. It's so gorgeous. There's a reason everyone flocks to the south of Norway especially Mandal. It's a completely different city in the summer. It's a tourist city. It swells up to 4 times its size. Everyone just boats everywhere. It's got a really nice charm to it, and we get a lot of German tourists. We get a lot of Norwegians as well. And it's exciting because when you have a good summer, it's as good as it can be in Spain or in Portugal. So you can have that, that magical week that just makes the rest of the year okay, because you just lean on that week and remember how amazing it was.
And again, I'm on Google Maps right now, kind of zooming in and out, and I can see how many little islands, and just the coastline around where Mandal is amazing to look at.
Yeah.
It just looks very Norwegian. Islands everywhere, lots of inlets. You were saying that boating is very popular. Is it the kind of place where most families own or have access to a boat?
I wouldn't say most families, but there is plenty of spaces for boats, and it's definitely a part of the culture here. It's, anyone's lucky to own a boat. Not everyone can afford a boat, but if you have one or your friends have one, that's likely where you are for weeks at a time. And people here, they do boat trips so differently. I grew up in California. We would have lake days. So we would be on the boat for maybe 5 hours at a time. But people here have boats where they just take off and disappear for 2 weeks and they live on their boat. Or, after dinner, they'll just say, let's go for a boat ride. And then they just bring a few beers and go fishing and just go right out to one of the islands. It's really... Yeah, it's so unique to the area, and it's very charming.
But now you work in Oslo, or at least your job is based in Oslo. Is there not a part of you that wants to live in the big city, or are you completely enamored with life in the small town on the south coast?
I am not completely enamored. I'm definitely charmed, and I really have no regrets, and I love where me and my family ended up. I lived in Oslo actually for 8 years before moving down south to Mandal. So I'm very familiar with Oslo. And I have to say, it's one of the best cities I've ever both lived in and visited. I think it has a bit of everything for everyone. And the fact that it's so close up to nature, both with the sea and all the forests around it, it's really a city where you can live and get the best of both worlds. But that being said, it's very expensive. And, as your family grows, your needs become different. And I loved my time in Oslo. I loved the convenience of jumping out to the theater, meeting some friends for a quick beer. And here it requires a little bit more planning. But here, I can afford a house. We can have a backyard and open up the door and just let our kids out and not have to go find a playground. So there's a lot of give and take. And like I said, I love that I ended up in Mandal, but it definitely wasn't the first choice. And I do identify with being a city girl. So sometimes it can be, again, the desire to be in two places at once. I don't know if that'll ever fully go away for me.
You mentioned the cost of living. It's an interesting question, given that you commute into Oslo and back, and that's not cheap. So even with that on top, it's still cheaper for you to live in Mandal than in Oslo.
It is. Yes, commuting is a cost, but it's always fun to have a little competition with yourself to see how little you can spend every week. So if someone were to commute for their job or to commute often from Southern Norway to the east side, which is more populated and has more job opportunity, I would definitely recommend the bus. It's so comfortable. It's double decker. You get a lot of comfort for the price that you pay. And it's pretty direct. If anyone suffers from car sickness or just, kind of getting queasy when they travel, like I do myself, then I would definitely recommend the bus over the train, because the train tracks were built and laid in, the 1800s. So they didn't exactly have the technology to make a straightforward high-speed train, which is my dream. Eventually, hopefully, Norway will have one make one from Kristiansand to Oslo. But right now, it's a pretty nice commute with the bus.
In terms of people coming to visit Mandal, it's probably not the first place on someone's itinerary. But if they're planning a road trip along the south coast, or perhaps they're arriving in Norway by ferry into Kristiansand and looking for something to do in the area, maybe Mandal will be on their hit list. So if so, where is the first place you would recommend someone go in Mandal?
It's special because a lot of with that question, you would immediately think, where's the hidden gems? Where do I want to show them, the authentic Mandal? And it's interesting because we have this beach called Kristiansand, and it's very touristy in the summer, but it's also a place that the locals like to go because it's so beautiful. And it's basically this huge sandy beach that looks like it could be in Spain and Portugal. And then right up when you come off the sand, boom, it's forest. So you have this thick, dense forest with a lot of beautiful walking trails. And then it's spilled out onto the sand, and then you're in the water. And the difference between the two is huge. It's like almost two different climates, and you can just jump between the two multiple times a day. And that's really exciting, whether it's winter or summer.
Yeah, it does look nice. Once again, I'm looking right now, and I'll certainly include a picture or two in the show notes of this episode just to give people a feel for where it is we're talking about. Now, how about the challenges of living in Mandal? And obviously the commute is one major challenge. That's quite a life commitment you've made there. But is there anything else? It's a town of about 10,000 people, I think, more or less. Do you have everything you need there, or are there things that you miss out on living in such a place?
I have the necessities. Absolutely. And I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. I think Norway in general does a really good job of bringing cultural activities and organizing sports in even their smallest of villages. So, we have a theater, we have a lot of organizations and teams that you can join. But I do feel, again, identifying as a city girl and coming from the nation's capital, sometimes I just want more things to happen. And I think that that's even natural to feel when you are in a big city in Norway in the winter. Sometimes it just feels like you're living in like a dead flatland because, 6 months out of the year, or 3 months out of the year, I would say, people stop riding their bikes so much and everyone's bundled up, and you don't even get that eye contact when you're walking to work because everyone's just hustling and trying to get to the warmth. So I miss the high tempo sometimes. But I'm also relieved when I come home from work. And after being in Oslo for 2 days, it's nice to pull up in my driveway and just look up and see all the stars with no light pollution. And I have this tradition where I get out of my car and I always take a moment to just look at the stars because I can, and just take a deep breath and just hear the silence. And I think, you can't find that in the city, even if you pay for the most expensive apartment. It's I feel like we're paying for silence.
We've talked a little bit about Southern Norway so far, but only really in the context of the coastline. I've mentioned Flekkefjord and Grimstad. You mentioned Kristiansand, which is easily the biggest city down on the south coast.
Yes.
But there's a lot more to Southern Norway than the coastal towns. There's an enormous area of forest as you go inland. Do you ever travel north into the inland part of Southern Norway, or are you really just focused on zooming along to Oslo and back?
Right now, zooming along to Oslo and back definitely takes up a lot of my time. My family has a cabin in a place called Hovden. You travel about 3.5 hours up north, and it's basically a mountain ski town, and it's really nice. And a lot of people down south, that's where they choose to build their second homes or their cabins so they can, like I said, the snow, it doesn't stick here. So if you're an avid skier or you want a bit more of that winter snow globe look, then you travel north and get up into the mountains.
I will say, though, that you say you travel up north. You are traveling 3 hours north of where you live, but you're still very much in Southern Norway in Hovden, right?
Yeah.
So there is a ski resort there, I see, and Hovden is a name I've come across in the past. Like, I can't think off the top of my head why I've heard of it. Perhaps I assume it's the ski resort. But what is there to do up there? Is it just a case of spending time in the cabin and with good family, good friends, and then doing a bit of skiing, or are there other attractions in the area?
Yeah, it is for me. It's definitely a place to kind of close off from everyone else and just spend the quality time with family. But I know a lot of people go up there and, it's a bit of a scene. I don't know if you've skied much in Norway, but the whole après ski and the whole culture behind that sport, however style that you choose to do, it's you can go up and travel alone and still meet people. And yeah, I feel like the locals are maybe not just the locals, but everyone else visiting is Norwegians are a bit more open. They're a bit more chatty in the mountains. I don't know if it's because they know they're on a break and away from their daily life, but it's been everyone I've talked to in Hovden is really helpful and just kind of wants to get to know you.
Now, I suppose the regional capital is Kristiansand, just in terms of the size of the city.
Yes.
Is that somewhere you, as a resident of Mandal, go on a regular basis, or because of your connection with Oslo, you don't really go to Kristiansand very, very often?
I think Kristiansand is a beautiful, beautiful city. It's still got that sleepy Southern Norway vibe, but there's definitely a lot more happening. It's about 85,000, if I'm remembering correctly. It's a place that me and Jonas, my husband, go when we want to do an extra special date, not just go out and grab takeout if we are free from the kids for the evening, but if we actually want to go and do a nice dinner or maybe find some good foreign food. They also have a climbing gym there that's really cool, and it opened last year. So indoor climbing is a really fun activity, especially for Norway. If you're feeling a little cooped up, it's kind of nice to get out but still be in. If that makes sense. There's definitely more food options if you're interested in dining in Norway. I would not recommend Mandal, but Kristiansand's fabulous.
Yeah, I've been a couple times in the summer. Again, had some fabulous weather, and you have the beach right in the center of the city, a really nice promenade, a fantastic hiking area. Well, a couple of fantastic hiking areas actually within walking distance of the city center. So yeah, Kristiansand, certainly somewhere I'd recommend in southern Norway. Is there anywhere else? We've talked Hovden, we've talked Kristiansand. Anywhere else you'd recommend in the southern parts of Norway for a visitor?
For a visitor, I think you mentioned Flekkefjord earlier in this podcast. And I think it's really special because with my commute, I'm always heading east. I'm always heading back to Oslo. So if you were to drive west and go to Stavanger, I don't have a reason to do that. So I haven't done it that much. And I have to say that as soon as you pass a town called Lyngdal and you start driving to Flekkefjord, it's almost like you've reached a different country. It's the landscape along the sea becomes a lot less flat and a bit more dramatic, for lack of a better word. It's almost like you're driving through cliffs in Ireland. And again, that's just my perspective, but I was blown away. I had to drive there for a police appointment to get my residence card and to get a new passport. And that's the fun thing about Southern Norway as well, is they've separated all their police departments. So if you need something government related, then you might have to drive an hour or two to go to that meeting. But I was so impressed by the beauty of Flekkefjord and, again, just the difference of what it looked like compared to all the other flat seaside southern towns.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little place. I think it's the Dutch Quarter it's called there, which is, again, full of white wooden houses.
Yeah.
Really, really nicely preserved. It reminds me a little bit of the old town in Stavanger, with the cobbled streets and the white wooden houses there. But lots of these places down on the south coast to enjoy. But I think that's about enough about Mandal and southern Norway for now. Let's talk about your adjustment to Norway, because we've been pretty positive so far about everything. But as any regular listener to the podcast knows, there are a lot of hurdles to jump through, both administrative and culturally, when you move to Norway. It's been several years for you now, as it has for me as well. But if you can think back about that process of adapting to Norway, how would you sum up the biggest differences from living in the US and the UK, I guess, to living in Norway? What was that first year like for you?
The first year was very hard. And it was so surprising because I came in so naive and so newly in love and just excited to experience a new country. And then you're slapped with all the administrative work and all the technicalities of when you apply for a visa and all the fine print that, maybe to my own fault, maybe I didn't read the first time. So then you have to start the process again. And it's expensive. You apply for even a temporary visa or a work visa, and we're talking, hundreds of dollars, a few £100 every time. So you need to make sure, if my best advice would be slow down, read the fine print, and really just decide what visa is most fitting for why you're trying to move to Norway. So it's, who likes paperwork? Not many. So it's a boring process, and it takes a long time. You get updates from the police department saying, your application is still in line. So you just got to be patient. And it was hard. I moved January 11th, 2013. And the idea was that, okay, if I move in the middle of winter, then things will just get easier because, it'll get brighter days and it'll be nicer out. And in a sense, that really works. And that's really smart if you just kind of start at the worst, most frigid. But I'm from California. There's things I didn't know how to dress myself. I thought a warm jacket was enough. To me, a beanie and gloves, those were always an accessory. Those were always to, look cute or add a little something extra. And here they're necessary. And I'm embarrassed to say how many months that took me to not just think like, oh, just throw on your jacket and you'll be okay. No, you'll freeze. You need to cover your head. You need to cover, the extremities, your hands. Put on the wool socks, drop all vanity in the winter. You're gonna, you have to wear layers like everyone else does. And somehow I feel like the Norwegians just make it work, and those Scandinavians, they make it look so good. But when you're wearing things that you didn't grow up wearing, you feel like a fraud. Absolutely. And you don't know. I felt like Bambi. I didn't know how to walk on ice. I've never had to learn. It's definitely something you have to practice. You walk a different way. You have to bend your knees more, and you almost have to hop instead of just, strolling along like I was someone who wore sandals for over half her life. So it was just these basic things that made me feel so unprepared. And it's not something that you Google when you're moving to Norway. How do I walk? How do I dress? Because you just assume that it's going to come more naturally, but it just makes you feel a little stupid at the beginning. And that's something I have to say all expats and foreigners should allow themselves to feel. You're going to feel stupid. You're going to make mistakes with the language, with how you dress, with how you, act in meetings or in your new jobs. The culture is different. So don't be too hard on yourself. Just laugh at yourself because it's going to happen. You can't avoid it. And that's all there is to that.
That is such a good answer, Agnes. There are so many things I want to unpack in there.
Yeah.
The walking on ice thing. I don't know if anyone's ever said that on the podcast before. I'm sure they probably have, but you're dead right. I mean, I've just spent the last couple of days here in Trondheim walking on ice, and it is horrifically slippy right now. But you just have to get on with it. You have to be wearing the right footwear. You have to not have your phone out when you're walking along the street, because then you will lose balance. There's so many things to know. And this probably sounds basic for someone who's grown up in, let's say, Canada or like Scotland or something. But, you're coming from California. I was coming from England, and, yes, I thought I knew what it was like to walk on ice. And then I had to walk on Norwegian ice.
Yes.
And this is ice that is rain, which the temperature is dropped, and then it snows on that frozen rain, and then that snow hardens, and then it rains again, and just this cycle carries on and on and on, and it creates the slippiest surfaces known to man. But anyway, let's leave that one there. It's a great point, though. You mentioned the language briefly there. Can you tell me a bit about your process there? I imagine having a Norwegian boyfriend at the time helped enormously with that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
Maybe not.
No, definitely. I have a lot of girlfriends that are also dating foreigners, so it's English primarily in their home. And they've often said, like, you have this advantage. You have his family that you're so close to. You guys go to the cabin for weeks at a time sometimes. So then you're fully enveloped in this other language. And I have to say, it took me a lot longer to speak the language than I thought. I haven't learned a second language in my life besides, the obligatory Spanish or French in high school, which is, we made crepes on Friday. You're not learning the language, or at least I wasn't really learning the language. So Yeah, it definitely, I didn't feel comfortable even ordering a coffee for a year because I had this idea in my head that I had to get it down perfect before I started speaking it. And that's wrong. Like it goes back to the whole just feel stupid. It's okay to feel stupid. You have to practice. You have to speak. You have to move your mouth and your tongue in a new way. And there's no way that you're going to get it perfect until you just keep doing it. So I definitely had the advantage. I have, his family's my family. So I have a lot of Norwegian family that's around me. And I have to say, they were a bit harsh without trying to be. But I moved here and I got this, they granted me almost like 6 months of speaking English to me. Both my in-laws speak English, his aunts and uncles. And then suddenly it was like it was discussed without me knowing, but they just switched to Norwegian and they didn't go back to English. So I was, there was a lot of uncomfortable dinners where they would speak Norwegian and I didn't understand what was going on. And, from an American perspective, I felt like it was so rude. I thought it was so like, they don't know, they know I don't understand what they're saying. So why aren't they changing? But now I'm just so grateful. And I feel like I would almost do the same in their position because my learning accelerated. And, they were always so generous with me and very kind, but they were very much like, you need to get this. This is your life now. This is the decision you made. And you're not going to get ahead if you don't learn the language. So they shut it off. And it was, again, a lot of foreigners speak about this glass wall between themselves and their new culture and, the new people, but it's a glass wall that you yourself have to take the time and the initiative to shatter because, that's their language. This is their country and they are absolutely allowed to feel comfortable at their dinner table. So that's what it comes down to.
And I guess also the same applies to the process of meeting new people, making friends.
Yes.
Your boyfriend's friends became your friends, and
yes.
that helps enormously in those first few years because it is difficult to make friends as an adult, I think, regardless of where you are. But when you're in a new country and it's often said that foreigners moving to Norway, that it's so easy to make friends with fellow foreigners because you're meeting them in language classes, you have a lot in common and so on. But actually making friends with locals, that is a lot more difficult. But you probably had a bit of a shortcut there too.
I did. Yeah, I absolutely had the advantage of meeting his friends and actually genuinely liking them and, forming friendships with them outside of him. But I do have to say, I have made a lot of friends through my co-working space. I've been very lucky that when I moved to Mandal, I had this rule, like the first year that you live here, you have to say yes to everything. It's uncomfortable. It's exhausting to socialize, especially when it's not in your language. But the first year I was like, this is the opportunity. If you say no, thank you to one beer or one coffee, maybe they won't ask you again. So I didn't want to come off as desperate, but I was definitely willing and came off as like, okay, let's do this. Let's meet. And it's really nice with these co-working spaces because you have these like-minded people, no matter what country they're from. We're all in the same boat. And the fact we're trying to help each other. We're trying to start our businesses and get forward and, move forward and advance. And if you are able to land someone that next job or that next freelance gig, then good on you. You should take that initiative and help someone else out because I think that'll come back to you. Absolutely. A lot of the jobs that I've worked these days has been because of some random, translation I helped someone out with that took 10 minutes of my day. And then they thought of me a year later and handed me a fat project. So yeah, accept help and be willing to help.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, Agnes, we are almost out of time. So it's time to move on to the same questions I ask every guest on the Life in Norway show. Okay. So some quick answers, please. What's the best thing about living in Norway?
The fact that everyone is so outdoorsy. It can be such shit weather sometimes, and that's just no excuse. So there's definitely that feeling of adventure and wanting to learn new sports and just get out, even if it's for a walk. It's nice.
And the most challenging thing about life here?
I really miss the variation and the variety of people, food, cultures. I grew up in California that's made of 1/3 immigrants. So there's a lot in that pot. And here it's very traditional and, I love the Norwegian way, but I miss the diversity. Absolutely.
And where is your favorite place in Norway, whether that's a whole town or a tiny secluded spot somewhere?
That would be Hovden, Norway. That is my place with my family to escape and just sit for hours and do whatever I feel like doing on the top of a mountain. I feel so lucky to have a spot there and to even have visited there. I love it.
Fantastic. You can find out more information about everything we've spoken about today on the show notes page. You can go to lifeinnorway.net/podcast. Agnes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, David. It was a pleasure.